Hello and welcome back to HEMA Fight Breakdowns. Today I'm going to be doing another full breakdown of a entire fight. This would be the semifinal longsword bout at the MG division in Ascalon that just happened a couple weeks ago. And this was submitted by one of the fighters here. So basically, if you're unfamiliar with this format, what I do is I go through the entire bout, exchange by exchange, and break down what happened as though I was each of these persons' coach. And basically talk about the techniques that they're using, what's working, what's not working, what can be changed, and more specifically, what can be adapted based on the actual context of a specific fight. So with that, also, it's going to be muted because there was some commentary and music playing over this video, and I don't need that in there. So here we go. Hand shot, looks like it was acknowledged. We'll break that down a little bit. Otherwise, a very basic offside hand snipe, very good for coming in. Doesn't look like it had much to hit. I'm also a little confused as to how it ended up on the opposite side of the sword. It clearly came in on this left side angle, this person's right side, and then that looks like it's it landing in the crossguard right there, and then somehow by this frame it's over on the other side, or maybe that's just a weird trick of the camera. But it gets acknowledged either way. It probably just snuck its way in over the top of the crossguard and hit, because we have such big bulky gloves, sometimes that happens. All right, next exchange. Looks like a one-handed thrust that missed. Another hand shot that also missed. All right, I'm going to watch that again. So it looks like there was a couple exchanges that weren't exactly called. But the first thing that I see happen here is we have this one-handed thrust that does look like it either makes it or just barely doesn't make it. It's parried off to the side at the exact same time as a cut lands on the hand. I can understand why that was missed. When someone's parrying something out of the way, that's kind of how everyone's thinking about what's happening. And when it makes that kind of contact, you're often not looking for it. Whether or not this one-handed thrust landed, I do think it could be improved if the feet were switched. And also, I generally always advise to not throw one-handed techniques while moving forward, specifically for this reason, because when they miss, you're stuck there. You have to finish the forward motion that you had and before you can back out, and you're sort of stuck there. Also, I would bet that if these feet were switched, there was a very, very good chance that it would have gotten the extra distance it needed to land better. But after that, they just separate. And it looks like what happens here is fighter on the left goes for a shield how at the exact same time as this fighter crosses over to the other side to go for a hand shot. Now, a shield how works by crossing the body line, in this case, from this person's right side to their left side. So when this hand shot comes around the other side, there's really no protection there. So it really looks like both the shield how and the hand shot either land. Maybe the shield how doesn't quite make it, but it's hard to tell here. But that hand shot most certainly did. At which point they separate because nothing is called again. There is a hand shot maybe here that comes in. This is actually a very interesting technique. Instead of throwing the Unterhau, which is what this beginning motion sort of telegraphs, they flatten it out with the long edge and throw the middle how across. Well, I guess it's technically the short edge by the time it lands, but whatever. That's an interesting little confusing technique where you basically trick a person into lowering their hands by feinting the Unterhau. As they go down into their plow to try to stay safe, you snipe the hand with that middle how right as they're transitioning into that guard where they're vulnerable. So after that hand shot lands, we got another one that comes right down over the top. Probably a double hand shot. They don't see the first one, but whatever. Not important. So right off the bat, what I'm seeing is a little bit of a lack of commitment from this fencer. There were a couple times where that one-handed stab just barely didn't make it. That shield how just barely didn't make it. The techniques that are being thrown aren't bad. They're just not quite committed far enough forward to properly reach, which is a problem you see a lot when people are very worried about hand shots, which is obviously what this fencer is doing over here. They're doing a very good job of sniping at the hands at the initial motion while moving backwards and capitalizing on the fact that this fencer over here isn't committing far enough forward. And whenever you don't commit far enough forward, every time you extend your hands out with any kind of technique, your hands become vulnerable where they weren't before, and they can be capitalized on with hand shots. So that's what's happening so far. Another Shield How, and in this time with good forward commitment, which lands very nicely. Also, as opposed to last time, the Shield How, again, crossing from the right side to the left side, catches what was a right Oberhow this time, deflecting it off to the side, landing into the shoulder, and perhaps not completely stuffing. Perhaps the hand should have been maybe a little bit higher, but sometimes there's not a lot you can really do. The placement is very good. Right into the lead shoulder is a great place to put any thrust because it's generally the furthest forward target, and it's going to help stop the momentum of any follow-up cut by basically arresting the dominant arm of your opponent. And yeah, that's about it. Yep, stab into the arm. So advice seems to have been taken. A little bit more of a commitment certainly made that Shield How land. More hand strikes, and another instance of the one-handed thrust attempted here. So as this hand shot comes in, this person goes out of range and immediately follows it up with what is attempted an interrupting one-handed thrust. The problem with this is that they were in range of the attack that was coming right at them. So best case scenario, you land that thrust and then you get hit, which is almost what happens here. But I believe when this thrust was thrown out, it got stuck in the hand or the arm a little bit. And that pressure that was felt by this fencer sort of made them cut their momentum short and their distance short. I think in reality, 99% of the time when you do something like this, what's going to happen is you're going to land that thrust because there's pretty much nothing that this person can do to block it. But then you immediately should be punished by getting hit in the head or the chest. It was only by luckily just getting out of the way that didn't work out that way. So again, really try not to throw the one-handed thrusts in that particular situation, as it's just pretty much guaranteed to get you doubled out. But I think it ended up working in this particular instance. Another one-handed thrust. Okay, so this is going back to the earlier problem, which I believe is without a commitment to this strike, which, as far as I can tell, didn't have the distance to really land, even from where it started. You'll notice that this person barely moves back more than a couple of inches. And I think even if they had stood exactly where they were, exactly in place, this cut was not going to reach them. And that's usually what I'm talking about when I talk about commitment, which is a lot of people throw techniques. If they don't have a chance of hitting, you're basically giving your opponent free leeway to throw whatever they want, particularly at your hands. And in this case, they did a proper deflecting cut, and it looks like they're coming around for that Zwerkow, but it targeted the hands with a kind of plunging reverse Shield How, maybe Scheidel How, arguable which one this actually is. But it's a very nice technique, and it hits the front of the hands, specifically because despite the fact that the distance is the same, this is a committed strike to an available target, whereas the one back here was basically to nothing. So same basic criticism, or I guess advice that I'd had for this fencer. Commit more on those strikes. Make sure you're really going for a target when you throw something out there. And this fencer is still doing a very good job of sniping those hands. I would advise them to basically just try to bait out these one-handed thrusts that keep coming out over here, parry them, and go for a deep target, and just really start racking up some good exchanges. Another decently committed Shield How. Looks like it was parried. And then the subsequent exchange, there was a hand shot. So this Shield How comes in. Looks like it actually may have grazed the mask, but if you actually look at this frame, the point is straight on, and by this frame, it's already deviating out. So chances are, if it maybe clipped the mask, it wouldn't have done very much, and likely just got pushed off to the side, at which point this fencer pulls their hands back to go for that low zwerk, which is a classic maneuver there. Might have snuck in a little bit under the crossguard, though it depends on where the point of contact actually is. If it's here, it's above the crossguard. If it's here, it's below. If it's here, it's above. Hard to tell really which one is the actual point of contact, unfortunately, with this footage. But if that did land, it was a perfectly reasonable response to take, at which point the even lower zwerk comes in here. And this is an interesting little technique here. They feint what looks like a lower right zwerk, but upon getting the lowest point of the low zwerk in that thumb grip, they instead reverse and go up with the short edge to try to clip the hands. So if you want to imagine that basically you're doing one of those flow drills that people do to warm up, as the sword hits its lowest point, almost as if it's in an iron gate position, you simply turn the short edge or the long edge forward and basically perform an Unterhau out of that position. So this whole sequence here is basically feinting a low zwerk and then mixing up the tempo to hit on the bottom of the hands. Perhaps a little bit unnecessary. That low zwerk probably would have landed all the same, but it did get them that extra bit of distance where this particular position looks like that zwerk was almost guaranteed to miss wide. So that seemed like a good little idea. So as far as I could tell, a potential hand strike here, hand strike here. Either way, this fencer is doing much better when they commit forward. This fencer is doing much better when they maintain distance. So that would be the advice for both of them so far. All right, I was just about to skip that deliberation. Another one-handed snipe that doesn't really make it, although I will point out that at least this time, the forward momentum stopped. Although ironically, another instance of throwing a technique that the other person had to walk into, it was never going to make it to them, even if they did nothing. But lucky for this person, the parry missed, so they got kind of stuck there for a second and couldn't capitalize. Looks like a leg shot that came in a very interesting trajectory. So again, same thing. Whenever you're throwing a one-handed technique, having the opposite foot forward really takes away a lot of your extra reach. And I think this is a perfect indicator of that. Look how far forward this left shoulder and left hip have to be just to get to the almost exact same distance forward as the dominant arm. Now, you, again, want to throw these one-handed techniques with your non-dominant hand because it's already choked down on the grip and you get those extra 6 inches. But again, if you switch these feet and switch which position this is from, you're getting 6 to 10 inches out of that easy in this exact same instance. Also, it came forward at a very interesting angle. It looks like it was thrown almost like a one-handed Schielhau with the flat basically straight up and down, and the quillions perpendicular to the ground, or parallel to the ground. So a little bit questionable as to whether or not the edge alignment was going to be great on something like this. Also, there was no real rotation. You need that whipping motion, that centrifugal force, to really get a lot out of a Geisling. So this would have been a little bit more of a tap. Another thing I will tell people all the time is that whenever someone is throwing a lot of one-handed attacks at you, one of the worst things that you can do is focus entirely on over-parrying them, because the advantage of one-handed techniques is that they sneak their way in around the reasonable parts of where a guard can be and hit you in places that you just can't defend from. They snake straight in and they touch you on the shoulder, or they come straight down and low and they tap you on the knee. Their advantage all comes from that distance. So what I'll tell people a lot of times is you try to parry them, but you try to parry them from here in this reasonable space. And if they go any lower, the only thing you can really tell yourself is to try to get whatever they're targeting out of the way while delivering a follow-up cut. Because at the end of the day, you still have to remember that there are certain things that people can do to always land their technique, under whatever definition of land you want to have. So sometimes the only thing you can do is strategize for the afterblow. Accept the fact that they're going to land that sneaky little one-handed thing, and instead of trying to parry them and wasting your tempo trying to parry something that's basically unparryable, you just attack. And as gamey as it sounds and sporty as it sounds, you have to accept the fact that it is still a sport, it is still a game, and you have to strategize to win, not necessarily strategize to be 100% safe at all times. So that Geisling kind of touches. Nobody calls it quality. I would probably agree with that. But yeah, so far, still same advice. More forward motion, better distance games, and just watch out for those one-handed attacks because they are coming very constantly. Looks like they're starting again, and I don't have to skip any more deliberation. Another one-handed thrust. All right. Looked like a pretty decent Shield-How there. They did call it, I was going to say. So what happens here is after this one-handed thrust, they get caught in the same pattern that happened a couple exchanges ago, which is this fencer, again, attempting to snipe at the hands, play their distance game. Looks like they might have touched it, but what looks like also is that at this extension, they realize what's coming and they kind of lose their forward momentum and they lose their sort of attacking mentality and they try to switch very quickly to defense. They probably do land this hand touch, but at the exact same time as that comes in, as you see, because of the position of the blades where this person's blade is on the outside line, it's getting stuffed a little bit by the Shield-How. It can come straight down onto the shoulder. Perfect vertical quillion, so you know that cut's valid, and it gives that tap, and most importantly, it can pull back and defend immediately after. So depending on whether or not the judges thought that initial hand cut was landed, both fencers still really trying to apply their game plan. All right, I'm skipping this. There we go. Looks like they gave points for something I don't quite understand, but whatever. All right, another double. Nothing to talk about here. A committed Shield-How, as we've seen many times. A cut around, as we've seen many times. This one just happened to hit the body, so it's a double. Ooh, okay. So an interesting application of multiple feints from the opponent here. This fencer on the right. They come in and they feint a couple of hand strikes over and over again to get this person to start windshield wipering back and forth, waiting for whatever hand shot actually manages to hit their guard. And when they open themselves up wide enough, they sneak that one in, land it, and they are able to cover afterwards because they basically put this fencer on the left into such a defensive loop that even once they take that hit on the hand, they don't throw a follow-up at all. Good application of multiple feints there. And I think the first real good piece of like aggressive distance management from over here. So if that's something they can pull off more than once, I would definitely say keep going for that because it worked great. Again, while they're deliberating, this person really needs to be more aggressive, which they are doing, but they're not covering their lines so well. Another perfect instance of that Shield-How coming down on the arm, the hand snipe coming afterwards. We're snipping that deliberation. Don't need to know what they're talking about. Another one-handed thrust. That one looked like it landed. And again, the real problem here is that instead of just going for the follow-up, they went a little bit too much for that deflecting cut. They tried to parry in the middle of their attack, and as a result, couldn't take advantage of the distance here. And again, just so we're clear, the reason why you switch these feet is look at this distance. That thrust has landed pretty deeply, and look how close the opponent's sword is to your body. No distance has been gained by doing the one-handed attack this way. This exact same thing could have been done with two hands to the exact same efficacy, and possibly even more if it was done from a bind. They're saying it went in the arm. Whatever. Looks like we're going to be in the last couple exchanges here. Good parry up top, Unterswerk low. Looks like it might have even hit the leg. So Oberhau comes in, gets parried. Zverk comes very low. Hits maybe a little flat to the hands. So one thing I can say is that you have to be careful when over-rotating your Zverks. If you look at this plane of rotation, it's basically aimed to hit the knee. If you look at where it's pointed down here. So when you hit the hands by then scooping back upwards, you're scooping upwards with the flat in that specific direction. Yes, you will hit the hands, but because you deviated from your actual cutting plane, in order to not hit the leg, or at least not miss the leg, you're basically deviating last second to scoop up and ruining your own cut a little bit there. Then there's a follow-up cut that also comes in pretty flat to the body. But, either way, it was a good parry Zverk from this fencer that maybe just could have been a little bit higher and it would have been okay. Skipping the deliberation again. And we're back to fencing. Should be last exchange. Another one-handed thrust. And another one that I think just fully does not take advantage of the reach. You can see it just barely sneaks through the hands and over the shoulder. And yet again, this cut, primed to hit, goes right into the body because this particular setup for throwing the one-handed thrust cannot take advantage of the distance. And now it's finally been punished. Now that the one-handed thrust missed at the exact same time as this fencer came in, the worst case scenario happened. Your one-handed thrust missed because it just got a little unlucky, and you get punished to the full extent that you can be punished. I hit to a deep target. All right, that was last exchange. We don't care about deliberation. So that was the fight. Final thoughts. I would definitely tell this fencer, I understand the use of the one-handed thrusts. Please switch your feet when doing it. You will find so much more success. And keep using those really decent Schielhaus and Zverks coming in because that's a tight loop. Throwing a Schielhau forward, closing off a line, entering a bind, and then Zverking out of it when it misses is a great little closed loop. People have to parry your Schielhau. They can't just throw attacks because you're closing off a line. And when they do commit to a parry on that Schielhau, you enter a strong, hopefully dominant bind that you can easily Zverk out of and, close the range and hit those mid-range Zverkhaus. Great strategy. You use the one-handed thrusts to break up somebody who is kind of just standing in front of you and waiting for you to attack. I use one-handed thrusts and one-handed techniques plenty of times, but they work best when your opponent is stuck in a defensive mindset, just kind of standing in front of you, waiting for something to happen. Because by throwing a one-handed attack in that instance, you're giving them something that their defensive mindset can't actually deal with because they're just so hard to parry. As for the fencer over here, they did a very good job of maintaining distance and sniping the hands and taking advantage of the lack of commitment from the left fencer. Continued to do that. When push came to shove, they also had some very decent aggression and forward attacks. I would say that the one thing they could do to kind of round out their game is throw more of those multiple feints and every once in a while throw a bit more aggressive non-right Oberhaus because the Schielhaus that were being thrown here were basically handcrafted to counter that. So when you start getting aggressive on this side, basically throwing anything other than a right Oberhau probably would have had a lot more success because it was aggression, one, that was helping keep your opponent on the defensive, but it's also aggression that isn't instantly countered by the one thing you've been seeing over and over again. That being said, congratulations to both fencers. It was a pretty good fight. If you would like to see your own fight reviewed on the channel, feel free to send me an email at HEMAFightBreakdowns@gmail.com, and I hope to see you next time.